Okay, thank you, Kindy, for the very kind introduction. As you may have heard in that introduction, I am apparently Michael Finkel. Or am I Michael Finkel? How does anybody here actually know if I am Michael Finkel? I will answer that question for you. You don't. No one asked for my ID. No one, my mother's maiden name, my social security number, nothing like that. I just walked into this conference. I didn't even stand in line to get a badge. I just came here and got mic'd up, and when someone said Michael Finkel, I jumped on the stage, and here I am. I could be some fake Michael Finkel who just showed up here and I'm giving a talk. Look, I don't even have it memorized. I'm looking at a piece of paper. I don't think a real Michael Finkel would do that. Maybe I'm going to go and collect Michael Finkel's paycheck right after this. And would any of you ever know? This is what my story is about. And I want to emphasize right here, before I get into this story, that this is all true, no fake news here. I actually feel, this is a little weird, I kind of feel like this is a late night sort of story, like a kind of like a campfire story, like we should all be sitting around, you know, like a fire. It should be dark. There should be, I don't know, owls hooting and coyotes calling, and I should have like a flashlight up to my face like this. But the slot that was given to me is in the morning, and so we will have to make do. This is also a creepy, kind of crazy story, and I know that everybody tells you that, oh, I've got a crazy story, I've got a crazy story. You hear that all the time. But, of course, not every crazy story becomes a Hollywood movie, and this one did, starring James Franco and Jonah Hill, and from right here in the United Kingdom, Felicity Jones. And the movie, like the book I wrote about it, is called True Story, which is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek title because the main character, as you will soon see, is a pathological liar and also a murderer. Okay, enough bragging about this. Let's get into the story. When this story starts back in 2001, I was a reporter for the New York Times. I had just gotten back actually from several months of traveling and reporting in Afghanistan, covering the war between the Northern Alliance and the Taliban, and before that I had spent many, many months in Israel and the Palestinian territories. The story starts with a phone call. My cell phone rang one day in my home in the northern United States in Montana, and I answered it. And on the other end of the line was a reporter from a newspaper in Oregon in the northwestern United States. So I answered the phone, and it was one of the strangest calls of my life. Probably not one of the strangest, the strangest. The reporter asked me if I was Michael Finkel of the New York Times. I said I was. And he didn't, by the way, ask me to prove that I was Michael Finkel of the New York Times, and perhaps I feel maybe this reporter would not make a very good privacy professional. The reporter then told me that a man named Christian Longo had just been arrested in Mexico. Now, until that moment, I had never heard the name Christian Longo. The reporter continued by saying that Christian Longo was wanted for 4 murders, and really not just any 4 murders, possibly the most horrific and unimaginable murders of them all. He was wanted for the murders of his wife and his 3 young children. They were all found dead in Oregon, while the likely murderer, this Christian Longo, fled to Mexico. Now, I had no idea why the reporter was telling me this. The reporter mentioned that Christian Longo had been listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. At the time, it was the same list that contained Osama bin Laden. Now, this was intriguing, especially to a reporter like myself, but I had no clue why this guy was telling me all this, and so, of course, I asked why. I said, "Are you telling me all this?" After Christian Longo escaped to Mexico, the reporter said, he changed his identity, which kind of makes sense for a fugitive on the run. But instead of adopting a false alias, he took on a real one, and apparently, he had done an excellent job convincing others of his new persona. While Christian Longo was in Mexico, wanted for the murders of his wife and 3 young children, he pretended to be a journalist. And his name in his newspaper, he told everyone he met, was, you guessed it, Michael Finkel of the New York Times. Now, of course, I'm a journalist, so my reaction was a journalistic reaction, like, what? How? Why? Yeah, I mean, anything a journalist might do. And I told the reporter, of course, I need some more information. I need to speak with Christian Longo himself. What's going on? And the reporter said, well, that was impossible. Christian Longo was speaking with no one. He was locked in jail. He had been extradited from Mexico to the United States, and that's why the reporter was calling me. He said he thought I might be able to provide some insight into this Christian Longo. He thought perhaps we knew each other. I said, sorry. I don't know anything about this Christian Longo. I have no idea. I have nothing to add. I apologize. You're the first person to tell me about this Christian Longo. And we eventually hung up. Now, obviously, I remember this vividly. I was like, all my journalistic senses were a little tingly, and I was wondering what's going on. And I decided, well, I'll send Christian Longo, who's ensconced in jail and talking to no one, I'll send him a letter in jail. And I wrote him a letter. I said I was a journalist. I said I was the real Michael Finkel. And I included my phone number. And a couple of weeks later, my phone rings, and I look at the caller ID, and it says, inmate call. And I answer, and I don't know how many of you spend time speaking with inmates, but if you do, you might know that before you can actually talk to someone, there's like this whole recorded message. It's like this legal boilerplate about, I think I wrote down, binding arbitration, limitation of liability, terms and conditions, et cetera. It goes on for a while. And then finally it says, to accept this call, dial 1 after the tone. And then there was a beep. And I dialed 1. Christian Longo, I said. I was all ready to ask him these questions. I'm the real reporter, remember? I'm going to ask him these questions. But the first thing Christian Longo did, before I had a chance to ask him anything, without any salutation, without any small talk, he asked me a question. How do I know, he said, that this is the real Michael Finkel? Anyone could have written me that letter, he said, trying for a scoop. Huh. This is exactly what I imagine a good privacy professional might do. I think I may have compared privacy professionals with psychopathic murderers. I apologize, I hope you forgive me. Can we go on? So this Christian Longo wanted me to prove that I was me. This is sort of an odd situation. I'm not really sure how to answer, I said. If you were here, I could show you my driver's license. Do you know my mother's maiden name, my social security number? I don't, said Christian Longo. Well, I said, I think you're just going to have to take this one on faith. Not good enough, he said. And I felt in his voice as if he were like giving me some sort of challenge or puzzle that I had to solve, but I didn't solve it. I was stuck. I don't know what to tell you, I said. I was prepared for that, he said smugly. I've made a quiz for you. I was sort of astounded, but actually I was a little bit relieved. And then Christian Longo, over the phone, jail to Montana, proceeded to give me a 13-question quiz. All of them about tiny details in my stories that I had written. Now, I had no idea how he had known about these details, but first I figured I had to pass this test. And actually, it was kind of a hard test. When I finish writing an article, I usually am sick of it, and I sort of jet it right out of my mind, and I don't really remember these details. And in fact, I believe I got the first 2 questions wrong. I think one question was, what's the name of a village someone lives in Afghanistan? And another question was, how much money did this laborer make in a year? And these are details I do not remember. And I thought for a moment that I would be unable to prove that I was really me. And it felt like some sort of existential conundrum. In the end, I was able to prove that I'm me. And then this fake Michael Finkel tells me over the phone and in follow-up calls and in many letters what it was like to pretend to be me. He said that he had been reading my articles for quite a long time, and before the New York Times, I worked for travel magazines and sports magazines. I even wrote for Skiing magazine for a while, and he had read my articles for years. He said he liked the style, he liked the adventures. He said he always wanted to be a journalist himself, able to just hop around the planet and write the type of articles I write. Now, I am not a well-known writer, not famous writer, not by a long shot. In fact, I think I just have one fan, and he turns out to be a psycho killer, but you take him where you get him in this business. Longo said that he was married at age 19, and he had 3 kids immediately after. He had no time for a job like that, which is a situation I know quite well. I happen to have 3 young kids and a wife right now, and I know how much time it takes. And he told me that my stories, he said, struck what he called his jealousy bone. He also told me, I love this, you have a writing style, he said, that I was not embarrassed to call my own. Then he proceeded to tell me how easy it was to fool other people. He said all throughout his time in Mexico, at hotels, at bars, with people he met on the bus, he said that he was a reporter from the New York Times. He bragged, like I just did, about all the stories he had written. He told these tourists, he was there on assignment. He said he was doing a story on Mayan mysticism and exploring all the ancient ruins, Mayan ruins of Mexico. I lived out a dream, Christian Longo told me. Now, I actually tracked down several of the people Christian Longo, the fake Michael Finkel, met in Mexico, and they all said they unquestionably believed he was actually a reporter for the New York Times named Michael Finkel. Here's one quote. He was well-spoken, polite, obviously intelligent. It made perfect sense to me that he was working for the New York Times. He had a good sense of humor. Another person told me that he asked the fake Michael Finkel if he was married. And the fake Michael Finkel said he used to have a wife. And the guy said, what happened? And he said, I got rid of her. And implying that they had been divorced. Now, Christian Longo, the fake Mike Finkel, said that the question he was most often asked by these people was, how much do you get paid for an article? Which is actually a question I do get asked, and the answer is distressingly little. He even purchased a notebook and started to take notes. he gave out a made-up New York Times email address to people who asked if they could contact him and possibly try and get their own works published, which, by the way, happens all the time to real journalists. It all felt so natural, Longo told me. It made him feel important. Then he met a woman, an attractive young woman, who was trying to become a photographer. She'd brought her cameras to Mexico to work on her fledgling career as a professional photographer. And Christian Longo, the fake Michael Finkel, immediately hired her. She thought that she had had the break of her career. I spoke with her. She sent an excited email to her mother saying she'd just gotten a big break. She bumped into a New York Times reporter, and now she was on assignment. And these two worked together for weeks. They hiked jungle paths, they visited ruins, they got up before dawn to beat the tourists, they explored underwater caves, they climbed Mayan pyramids, and this woman was snapping photos, and this fake reporter was taking notes. This is what Christian Longo said. We worked as a well-oiled photojournalist team. And as I think you are probably wondering, yeah, they embarked on a romance as well. Now, I have been on assignment many, many times with some very attractive people, and even when I was single, that never happened to me, and I actually was wondering for a while if Christian Longo was doing a better job of being me than I can do of being me. Now, Christian Longo even went so far as to draft an email to an editor at the New York Times explaining the article he wanted to write, and it's fortunate that he was in a non-internet zone when he wrote that, and that before he mailed it, the FBI caught up with him and arrested him. And I sometimes wonder just how far he would have gone. And what if he was a really good writer? What if he was a better writer than me? Anyway, he was arrested by the FBI, was extradited from Mexico, and put in jail in Oregon, where he was awaiting trial. Now, after Christian Longo told me this quite crazy story, he also told me that he was innocent of the murders and that he would prove it to me. Now, I'm not going to go into this too much other than to tell you, after a ridiculous game of cat and mouse that lasted more than a year, he did not prove it to me. Or, I'm happy to say, to a jury. He was found guilty of the 4 murders and was sentenced to death. And to this day, Christian Longo is on death row at the Oregon State Penitentiary. Now, I certainly hope nothing like this happens to any of you, but you are in this sort of business, the business where others want to take information that belongs to somebody else and use it for their own nefarious purposes. And I mean, I've just listened to the last speaker and been watching the news. I feel like it is an essential thing that everyone in here is doing. And not only that, it seems to grow more and more essential by the day. And I have to tell you, one of the very scariest things about Christian Longo is that he is not scary at all. Not one bit. I met with him in jail several times. He was handsome, charming, well-spoken, basically what all the people in Mexico said about him. Certainly much better looking than me. The people who can do the most harm, it turns out, are often the ones you might least expect to do that. Longo, up until the night of the murders, apparently never seemed to have a violent moment in his life. He seemed to be an attentive father, a loving spouse. He went to church every weekend. He was clean-cut, unfailingly polite. Everybody seemed to like him. Several women in his church that I interviewed told me they used to nudge their husbands and say, "Why can't you be more like Christian Longo?" Trust people, but verify, I think, is the expression. And I think the case of Christian Longo shows just why your job is so important and so necessary. You never know where privacy is going to be breached, how information will be stolen and used, from what source data piracy will arise. It seems to come from the most unexpected places, not merely psychopathic killers. Your vigilance is needed, and I, for one, am most appreciative for your work. Now, before I conclude, there might be one small clue that I can offer you. No one, not one person I interviewed, said they ever heard Christian Longo use a swear word. Now, there we are. I find this absolutely unbelievable. No swear words? Never? I think the lesson here that I'd like you to take away is never trust a person who doesn't use a swear word. Are we all in agreement here? I sure fucking hope so. Thank you.